Oh, the dreaded ACT and SAT, arguably the most hated tests by high school students in the history of standardized tests. Although the knowledge needed for these tests is fairly basic, they continue to stump students due to a lack of strategy. In this module, we're going to be going over tips for the SAT and ACT and how to reverse engineer your goal score so that you know exactly what you need to do to succeed.
Woohoo! Module 4, Achieving Your Goal SAT and ACT Score. The girl on the cover of this module gives me so much life, and that's how I want each of you guys to look when we're done with this module, because hopefully I can provide some relief today on how to reverse engineer your score and use certain strategies and techniques and tools in order to get the score that you need for the specific college that you want to go to. Okay, so let's jump right in. Here's the game plan for today. Reverse engineering your goal score. We're going to have a specific worksheet on that in the activities for this module, so make sure you print that out. Your reading section for the SAT and ACT, your math section for the SAT, ACT, the ACT dreaded science section. A few more helpful tips from me, the practice strategy that I use to raise my SAT score around 150 points in a few months, and then the ultimate SAT, ACT toolkit, all of the things I found helpful as an SAT tutor myself and someone who studied very, very hard for the SAT. Reverse engineering your goal score is very important. I think a lot of students just shoot for the stars when it comes to SAT and ACT scores, like trying to shoot for a score that sounds good, but you want to be exact with your goal score, because then you can break it down into how many points you need to get right on each section and how many more points that is than how many points you're getting right currently. And it makes it much easier to study, and mentally it seems possible because you've put tangible, actionable numbers on it. So let's get into the process of reverse engineering your score. So first up, you want to find the score range for each school that you want to apply to. So say you take your top 3 schools, you can go online. This is public information, and just say SAT score range for Chapel Hill. We'll go with my home state school, Chapel Hill. It'll pop up and it'll give you the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile of students. And that's basically the middle range of students. So 25% of students did better than that range, 25% of students did worse than that range. And the middle group of students falls within that range. I would say you want to be in between the 50th and 75th percentile. We want you better than average so that your score is not going to hurt your admissions chances, and that it's actually going to help your admissions chances because it's better than average for that school. But decide what a safe score is by averaging all of your top 3 schools' score ranges. Once you have your goal score, right, that you feel like you need to get to be safe, meaning your scores are going to be in line with the students who are also applying to that school or better, break it down section by section to examine the number of questions you need to get right to achieve your goal score. And we're going to look at the scoring rubric on the next slide, so that'll make more sense. And then calculate how many more questions you need to get right on each section in order to reach the score. So let's look at this rubric that we're talking about. I listed off the rubric for the SAT and the ACT. So over here on the blue, this is the SAT. So we're going to start with this. So if you see here, this is literally how the SAT is graded, and this is public information. I didn't pull it from some secret source. If you go to the release practice exams that I'm going to link for this course, the rubric is right here, meaning you can grade every SAT that you take by yourself and know already how your SAT is going to be graded. So here's your raw score, meaning out of the questions for that specific section, the number that you get right. So let's say that right now you have a 600 in math, right? So a 600 in math would mean you're getting 36 questions right on the math section. And if we come down here, where are you? Okay, it does not show here. It does not show the math. But the math is just a combination of your non-calculator active and your calculator active raw section scores for both of those. So say you got, there's 20 questions on the math non-calculator active. Let's say you got 10 right on there, and then there's 38 for the math calculator active for the SAT. We'll say you got 20 there. So that would be 30 raw questions right for the math section. So we'd come to 30, your math section score would then be a 550, right? Oh no. So if your goal score is, say, a 650, then you would need to get 41 questions right. So then you look and say, difference between 30 and 41, that's 11 more questions that you need to get right. And then where are those 11 questions coming from? Are they coming from eliminating simple mistakes, increasing your time management strategies, right? Studying more content? Is there a content deficiency that you have, some skill that you don't know how to do for the SAT, right? But you want to think of where can you gain those extra 11 points. But by knowing it's only 11 questions between 100 points basically, right? Then you know, and even for things that are more competitive, right? So for the math section, say you're at a 700, you want to get to a 750. 700 is 48, 750 is 53 questions. That's 5 questions, right? So where are those 5 questions coming from to see a huge jump in points that can really, make or break your math SAT score. For reading, it's a little bit more complicated, which is shown down here. You take your raw score for reading and you get a score between 10 and 40. And then you do the same thing for writing and language, get a score between 10 and 40, add those two scores together, multiply by 10, and that's what you would get. So for example, say that you got, there's 52 questions on the reading test. We'll say that you got 40 right? We'd go to reading right here, that's a 32, so that would be 320. And then there's 44 questions in writing and language. We'll say that you got 30 right there. So we'd go to 30, go all the way down to writing and language, and then we'd do 290 plus 320 and get whatever score that would be for your evidence-based reading and writing score. But you can still backtrace how many questions you need to get right for each section. So the ACT is a little bit more simple, and I actually have the scale score pulled up here, which is a lot easier to read than this one. Once again, this is coming from Google Images. This is public information that you can look at. So say, for example, you're at a 30 right now, or we'll say that you're at a 25 right now, and your goal score is a 30, right? So in math, and it's easier to see here, in math for this specific test and this specific rubric, you're getting between 38 and 39 questions right now to get a 25. You would need to get around 10 or 11 more questions right to get a 30, to go up 5 points, right? For reading, that's even less. It's 5 questions. 5 questions between a 25 and a 30 for reading. Right, so for English, right, to go from a 25 to a 30, you have around 7 or 8 questions. So you can break it down to see how many questions you need to get in each section, and then see how you're going to gain those questions based on the strategies that we're going to talk about in the latter half of this module. So I hope that was helpful, and it's really gives you some concrete numbers that you need to achieve your goal score, which I think is quite pacifying as you're trying to achieve this score that you have not yet. It's close. It's in the horizon. It's only a few points away. Okay, so let's talk about some specific strategies for the reading section of the SAT and ACT. They're slightly different, but these are general strategies that I'm going to talk about. So for the reading section, the answer to an ACT or SAT reading question is as clear, definite, and objectively predictable as the answer to an SAT math question. In order for ACT and SAT reading to fit the format of a multiple choice test, it must be free of interpretation, it must be objective, so it cannot include bias. And we're going to use this to our advantage. If it has to be objective, then it really has to be a restatement of the passage or an example of the passage without bias, without interpretation, without any gray area. It has to be black and white. It has to be predictable. And so all ACT and SAT reading questions will do one of two things: restate the text without changing the meaning, or demonstrate an idea that appears on the page. So what does restatement look like? Ideas that are directly restated from the passage in the answer choice. Demonstration is a little bit harder to identify. The answer either provides an example or scenario described in the text, or the text provides an example or scenario that's described in the answer. So it's a demonstration of the concept in the passage rather than a restatement. It's going, an example is a great idea, right? It's furthering the idea, but it's still the same idea without interpretation. Beware, the College Board will the College Board or ACT Inc., which is the administrator of the ACT, deliberately phrases questions to make you think you should use subjective interpretation. This is really challenging for students because in our English classes, in our AP literature classes, AP Lit, AP Lang, right? All of our life, we're taught to interpret what the author's trying to say. We're taught to put our own bias and our own interpretation in our English classes. We write literary analyses about what the author is trying to say. And we're tested by the College Board in a different test for AP test on our interpretation of what they're trying to say. We have timed rights on what they're trying to say, but they don't want you to interpret here. Yet they still will phrase questions in a way that make you think that interpretation is needed. So I listed some examples here. For example, if it says which choice most nearly means, you want to think of it as which is the only choice that means the same thing as, right? Very, very black and white. The author of passage to would most likely respond. You would want to think of it as the author of passage 2 directly states which opinion, right? All evidence should be able to be found in the passage. And I've taken the reading section strategy specifically from the SAT Black Book, which is a tool that we're going to talk about later in this module that I highly recommend you get. One of the best books for SAT strategy that I believe is on the market. Now let's focus on the SAT and ACT math section. So for the math section, there's a specific strategy that you can use if it works for you, and it is going through the test in passes. This is once again another strategy that I found in the SAT Black Book. I think it's really helpful. This was personally not a strategy that I used, but if you're struggling with time management, this will be the strategy for you because you want to approach the test in the order that you choose, not in the order that they're presented. So if it helps, go through the test multiple times, and I'm going to talk about the 3 passes, what each goal for them is when you go through the test, and what you should be gaining from them as you go through the test. So the first pass is an easy question and information gathering pass, meaning when you go through the test, this is what you're trying to achieve. Start with the first question, look at it for 10 seconds. If you have not figured out how you're going to solve it, skip it. The questions that you're going to answer in the first pass, you want to automatically almost automatically, right, within 10 seconds, know how to solve it. So even if it's going to take you more than 10 seconds, you want to have an idea of how you're going to get to the answer. For example, if you're looking at a systems of equations question, you read it and you say, this is systems of equations. I know this like clockwork. This is from Math 1. That's a question that you can answer in the first pass, right? And then repeat this method with each question, skipping as many as you needed, and working through simple questions that you can answer quickly and you know that you will be able to get right. Avoid all simple mistakes on this pass because this is going to be where you're going to gain the most points from those easy questions that you can secure the answers to. So avoid simple mistakes because they will rob you of points for questions that you actually knew the answer to, but you just weren't meticulous in your work. Okay, the second pass are questions that require more time. So go back to the beginning of the test and start with the first question that you skipped. Work more deliberately than you did during the first test, the first time you went through the test, ensuring that you answer these questions correctly. These questions may take a little bit more time and a little bit more thought, but you should still know how to answer them. Don't get bogged down by difficult questions that are too time consuming. So once again, I would use the maybe like 15-20 second test here, right? So looking at a question, give it more time, see if you know how to do it. If you've come to, sort of a way that you think you're going to solve it, go ahead and try it. If you have no clue, skip it and save it for the third pass. And on the third pass, you're going to focus on what you can do. These are the most difficult questions that you have saved for last. You'll have an edge on some difficult questions, meaning you'll know maybe how to solve them. Focus on those. Focus on what you can do. And then, of course, check over other answers for simple mistakes. Simple mistakes are the difference, I really think, between a lot of students, between like a 1400 and a 1450. Just how meticulous you are in reading the questions, knowing what the questions are asking for, checking over your work, right? Making sure that there's no simple errors, that any errors are coming from something like time management or content deficiency, which are things that we can fix. But we want to make a point of eliminating all simple mistakes. So use that third pass to make sure all of your bubbles are correct, all of the questions that you have answered, you avoided simple mistakes, and that you're all good to go. If you don't answer all the questions, that's okay. I always say to my students, right, there's 38 questions on Math Calculator Active for SAT. I would rather you get 20 good questions, right, 20 questions right, rather than skimming over and flying through 38 questions to get to the end of the test and only getting around like 15 or so right. Right? It's better to get the questions that you know you can get right than to skip those questions to spend your time on questions that are more difficult that you just may never be able to crack. Because at the end of the day, each question is worth an equal amount of weight. About that ACT science section, I've heard people who love and hate the ACT science section. I think it has its fans and haters. It's 35 minutes and 40 questions long, and I wanted to just touch on 3 things quickly that are going to help you. So don't get bogged down by passages and figures. Ask yourself 2 main questions. What's the main point here, and what's this figure showing? You want to look more so at patterns and the main gist of the figure. Don't get bogged down by like details and like reading through everything, because there will be very confusing things that are designed to do exactly that, confuse you. Instead, look for the main point of what the passage or figure is trying to say, and then look for the details in the specific questions. Understand each type of ACT science question, which I'm going to link an in-depth guide linked from Prep Scholar that goes through each type of ACT science question that you will encounter and how to solve that specific type of question. This is going to come from practice, which we'll talk about on the next slide, but once you practice so much, you'll be able to identify specific patterns in the test, and you'll be prepared and know exactly which questions they're going to ask. And then the ACT science test analysis skills, not scientific knowledge. There is a misconception that the ACT science test requires you to be a chemist in order to succeed. But it actually tests your analysis skills. Although maybe if you've taken chemistry, you probably honestly have more analysis skills than your average student taking the ACT science section. But as long as you're strengthening and refining your analysis skills and really working on that, you will be able to interpret the patterns and diagrams on the ACT science section without prior knowledge of whatever they're talking about, right? Because they're not testing your scientific knowledge. They're testing your ability to interpret data and make conclusions. Okay, a few more helpful tips. As I talked about earlier, eliminate simple mistakes. I'm not going to touch on this again because I nailed it pretty hard on the last slide. But you want to eliminate simple mistakes because they will steal points from you that you know you should be able to get right. Understand every single mistake that you make. You have to be meticulous and ruthless as you're breaking down your mistakes, because if you don't understand your mistakes, you'll make the same mistake again. The key to me raising my score was that I understood every mistake that I made and I didn't make the same mistakes again, and so I was able to rapidly increase my score every single time. We have a specific mistake breakdown sheet that I used myself, that I used with my paid SAT tutoring clients here in Wilmington as well, that I'm going to give to you guys at the in the activities for this module that you should print out and use as you are practicing on your own. And it really guides you through what you need to do when you're breaking down a mistake. Practice until you begin to notice the patterns of the test and then nail those patterns down, right? So I'm going to talk about this in the next slide with my specific strategy, but once you've tested enough, as I said, you'll begin to develop specific knowledge of the patterns of the test and be able to anticipate what questions they're going to ask. And this is so important. Practice with College Board and ACT Inc. content only. I see students all the time buying Barron's, buying Princeton Review, buying other test prep books. Those are great companies. I have nothing against them, but they don't write the SAT or the ACT. It's almost like if you were going to take a test that your teacher was going to write for you, and I said that I was going to give you practice tests, but I was going to write them. I'm going to write my tests a little bit differently than the way that your teacher is going to. And you want to practice with the real thing. And there's honestly no excuse to, because there are released SAT and ACT tests that I'm going to link to at the bottom, and they're completely free. A book from the Princeton Review with 2 practice tests in it cost maybe like $60, right? There's answer explanations for every SAT test and ACT test out there. So there's no reason for you to not practice with the released materials. But the patterns that you're going to identify in the SAT and ACT can only be identified if you practice with released SAT and ACT test, right? So be very careful of that. I see students make that mistake all the time, and then they've been practicing so hard, they take the real deal and they're not improving. And it is most of the time because they weren't practicing with high quality materials. High quality materials being the exact test that you're going to take with the patterns in that test that you're going to take on the day of the SAT or the ACT. So my specific practice strategy, the practice strategy that I use to achieve my goal score of this on on the SAT. So I practiced by section. I initially tried to practice on Khan Academy, which I'm going to link to, but I practice reading one day, math the next day, reading one day, math the next day. And what happens is that you're not able to identify the specific patterns, as I've said, for like the 13th million time, within each of those sections. So you want to practice section by section, meaning math calculator, and then take 4 math calculator sections on different days and do a breakdown of your mistakes on each of those sections. And then when you take them in a row, you'll start to see specific sections for there. And then once you get to the goal number that you want to get for that section, right? Going back to reverse engineering your score, you should know the specific number of questions you need to get correct in order to achieve your goal score. Once you reach that number, you can move on then to the next section. So I did like math, non-calculator active. Once I got to my goal score there, I went to calculator active. I took 4 or 5 tests there. Then I went to reading, took 4 or 5 tests there. Then I went to writing and language, took 4 or 5 tests there. And then before the SAT, I took 1 full test, dragging myself to the library, sitting down for 4 hours and taking that test, so that I could practice the endurance, rather than just taking one section at a time, which I had been used to. And that was a practice schedule that really helped me. And once again, I practiced with real SAT materials. I did not submit my ACT. You don't have to submit both. You can, but I highly recommend picking one test that you were going to test better on, that you tend to test better on, and then putting all of your energy in that. So as a rising senior, you should hopefully have an idea of what that is for you by now. And I recommend using this summer to practice as much as you can and then test in the fall of your senior year on that test that you believe you're going to do better on. Work through all 4 sections of at least 5 to 6 tests. So I really think in order to start seeing improvement, you do need to take around 5 to 6 tests. I usually saw my breakthrough around test 5. There are 8 released practice tests for the SAT and 6 for the ACT, so there's no excuse not to take that many. And if you plan it out well, you should be able to get in that many. And use the mistake breakdown worksheet for this module. It really will help. And then what does that breakdown sheet include? We're going to talk about that right now. So step 1, identify the surface level reason that you missed that question. So for example, that may be a simple error, like you didn't really read what the question is asking. And then step 2 would be to identify the deeper cause of this mistake. Was it time pressure? Was it a content deficiency, meaning something you hadn't learned or something that you forgot, a skill that you didn't know how to do? And then once you've identified that, fully understand why the correct answer is correct, why the correct answer is a better answer than the answer that you chose, and why the answer you chose is wrong and could not be the answer. Understanding that will ensure that you do not make the same mistake again. And then here's my toolkit that I want to give to each of you. The SAT Black Book is a great book that I recommend you buy. It's written by an SAT tutor who is like world renowned. And I think it has a great strategy in there that you may not necessarily find in the Princeton Review. It has the strategy that I talked about literally word for word in this module. I learned it from him. So I recommend picking that book up. The 2 worksheets that we're going to include in this module, the reverse engineering score worksheet, so you can reverse engineer your goal score. Highly recommend you do that. That will have the rubrics for the SAT and the ACT on there to help you so that you have gotten it down to how many questions you need to increase on each section in order to get your goal score. The mistake breakdown template, you need that. You need it so very much as you're practicing yourself. I highly recommend print that out, make 1,000,000 copies because you will need it every single time you make a mistake. I'm going to link to 8 full-length released SAT practice exams along with 6 full-length released ACT practice exams. Those are straight from the College Board and ACT Inc. on their websites, and they have answer keys to go with them, along with answer explanations, I believe. I know for sure the SAT does, and I'm sure the ACT does as well. Prep Scholar is a great blog that I used with thorough strategy guides for the SAT and ACT. I highly recommend you check that out, especially if you're trying to score a 1400 and above. That really helped me as I was trying to get my score really into a high range to compete for those competitive universities. And then Khan Academy has free practice resources, and if you're not someone who you know already can't take a 50-minute test, they have mini practice sections that I think are really helpful. They give it to you in five question little quizzes that I think can be done quickly, and you can set up your own practice schedule, and they'll even sync it with your email. And you can also sync any SAT that you've taken with Khan Academy, and then it will recommend things for you to practice based on the questions that you missed the last time on the SAT. So that's really cool. And all of the materials that they use are from the College Board as well, so they can be trusted.
That was a lot of information for this module, so make sure you rewatch this module as many times as you need. In the activities for this module, there will be a reverse engineering your score worksheet along with a printable version of the SAT and ACT tips we talked about in the presentation. There will also be a lot of helpful links for this module, ranging from book recommendations to the printable tests that I talked about, so make sure you check those out as well. I hope that with the strategy we talked about, you feel prepared for your next test day. I'll see you in Module 5.